Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's journey. We're heading to ancient Rome, especially from the 1st century BCE to the 3rd century CE, and expanding into ancient Greece, Sparta, Athens, and Mesopotamia. The periods of empire building, urbanization, the era when prostitutes were strictly regulated by law, taxes, and symbols, about professions tied to the body, rituals, social strategies, courtesans, prostitutes, royal escorts, intellectual call girls, sacred sex workers, military camp followers, lupanar brothel girls, etc. And those side roles like political sex slaves, social weapons, ritual tools, the army's invisible hand, women, and sometimes men, who sold their bodies on the cold stone floors of ancient Rome. Prostitution, once considered a profession, emerged quite early in human history. Uniquely, prostitution arose from the very roots of Mesopotamian civilization. You'd think being a prostitute in ancient times was steamy, mysterious, sexy. A brick room without a door, heavy breathing from the next room seeping through the wall, and you, 18 years old, waiting for your 17th client of the day, with bruises not yet healed from last night, and your pay only enough to buy smelly dried fish. Before we begin, if this feels like a comforting place to hide away tonight, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly want to, no pressure. Like the rule in ancient taverns, only sit if you need a quiet spot. And you know what I love the most? Reading the comments, seeing where you're from, and what time it is now. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 a.m. or 5 a.m., you're still here, and I see you. Now turn off the lights, switch on a little fan if you have one, not for the heat, but for the gentle hum. You wake before the sun peeks over the dunes of Thebes. Outside, the sound of oxen breathing and wooden clogs echo from the distant marketplace. But you're not a farmer's daughter. You don't plough fields. You don't weave cloth. You are part of the temple of Hathor, and your job is to serve the gods with your body. No one calls you a prostitute. No one dares. In ancient Egypt, you are sacred. You are chosen by the gods. You are the living embodiment of the goddess of love, Hathor, crowned with cow horns and playing the sistrum in the ecstasy of the cosmos. You don't just dance. You don't just sing. You help the pharaoh connect with the divine by sleeping with him. Of course, it's not always the pharaoh. Sometimes it's the high priest, a senior official, or someone who's donated generously to the temple. Each time the ritual takes place, candles are lit, you bathe in essential oils, and wear a linen dress so thin it's merely a pretense. You step into the sacred space where incense mixes with sweat, where prayers blend with soft moans. They call you divine. But sometimes you feel more like a walking sacrifice. You have a name, but only your sisters use it. The world calls you temple courtesan of Hathor. They watch you pass with eyes full of envy and contempt. Men long to touch you, but their wives call you a lustful disease wearing a wig. You live in a private quarter of the temple, where the walls show the goddess embracing her devotees, but inside lie cold stone beds, sacred cleansings 3 times a day, and endless nights with no end to visitors. Occasionally, a sister disappears. No one speaks the reason. They say she was transferred to Memphis for higher rights. But you know, once, a girl was taken in the middle of the night for refusing a senior official. They said she was possessed by Seth, called her a witch, a disturber of Hathor's spirit. After that, no one dared refuse, even if it hurt, even if they were scared, even if the man entering the room reeked of blood and wine. You learn to nod without eye contact. Learn to obey without letting tears smear the paint on your cheeks. You start to understand, not everyone wants to touch the divine, but everyone wants to use power to turn divinity into a puppet, especially during Hathor's festivals. On those nights, the entire temple blazes with torches, honey wine fills golden cups, and the scent of fermented beer mingles with lotus oil. You and your sisters dance until exhaustion, then are led away one by one like mobile offerings. They call it devotion to the goddess. But you know, many don't pray to gods, they pray to flesh. And you are just a convenient bridge. When you return, you lie on sweat-soaked reed mats, incense clinging to your hair, and your hand trembles touching your own neck. Some nights, you hear a sister whisper, "At least no one hit me this time." Some say, "At least you're fed, at least you're sheltered." True. But no one asks what's left of you when the rites end. After every major ritual, you and your sisters are led to the purification room. There, 3 large basins sit beneath a smiling statue of Hathor, and you must soak, scrub, wash your hair with salt, herbal wine, and a fragrant blend made from myrrh resin. They call it returning to the sacred state. But you know well, they're just trying to wash away the parts of the ritual no one wants to speak of. You sit naked on cold tiles, watch dried blood spiral away in pale red water. Hear an elder sister murmur, "Don't forget to scrub your palms, or they'll say you still carry a mortal's touch." After drying, you're perfumed with incense, clothed in clean linen, and called divine again. But that night, you still shiver washing your face, trying to scrub away things that have no name. Sometimes you wonder, does Hathor ever get tired? Does the goddess ever just want to sleep without being called to smile seductively? In ancient Egypt, prostitution existed under ritual robes. There were temple courtesans, public prostitutes, women hired just to dance provocatively at weddings. Society accepted them as part of cosmic order, but never respected them as people. In many tombs, images of women dancing, pouring wine, pouring water on male bodies were carved, but their names were not. You won't be carved either. You are just a soft, fragrant part, meant to keep the divine flowing to mankind. A conduit, a perfume-soaked pleasure, a living being not allowed to dream. You are not an ordinary woman in Uruk. You don't spin thread. You don't make pottery. You don't carry water along the canals leading to the Euphrates River. You live in a temple, tall, sturdy, filled with resin smoke and bright red clay statues. And during every major festival, you are chosen to do something very special. Not everyone gets to lie with the king, but you do. In ancient Mesopotamia, people believed the land was fertile only when the gods were pleased. And to please the gods, the king had to do one simple but solemn thing: sleep with a woman who represents the goddess Inanna, the goddess of love, fertility, and also war. You are that woman. You walk into the ritual chamber, where wool rugs are laid out and dried flower petals are scattered, where incense mixed with palm oil creates a scent both pleasant and mind-numbing. The king is already seated, wearing silk robes and a golden crown adorned with seashells. You are called Entu, the keeper of the sacred flame. But tonight, you'll be keeping something else. They call it the sacred marriage ritual. But you know very well, it's a national level sex performance, with the audience being the gods. You and the king drink barley beer mixed with honey and read poetry dedicated to Inanna, a poem you've memorized down to the last breath. O my lover, plant the seed in the sacred field. O my goddess, open the land, receive the spring rain. And so, the ritual begins. You try to look reverent, but like many times before, this king doesn't know the difference between a love poem and a sick leave request. He's clumsy as a dull sickle, and you have to grit your teeth and smile, because outside, priests are chanting, and the people are lighting fireworks to celebrate. The planting season. No one knows that while the nation rejoices, your shoulder is dislocated. After the ritual, you are not allowed to leave right away. You have to lie there alone in the stone room, with burnt-out incense and the king's sweat soaking the rug, in a sort of closing ceremony. They say, it's so you can absorb divine power. But all you feel like is a statue placed in the wrong spot. That night, you fall asleep with resin scent still in your hair, and you dream. In your dream, Inanna doesn't stand tall like a statue, doesn't smile sweetly like the paintings on the temple wall. She's curled up, black hair falling loose, eyes lifeless. She doesn't look at you. She doesn't speak. There's only a scratch on her shoulder, and the strong smell of blood, like she too has just gone through a ritual no one asked her permission for. You wake up startled, sweat soaking the back of your robe, and you begin to wonder, if even the goddess didn't have a choice, then who among us is truly being worshipped? In Mesopotamia, Entu were respected. On paper, you were given rice, cooking oil, a few servants. You were called wife of the god. But if you ever fell in love with a mortal, you'd be thrown into the river. The goddess Inanna didn't tolerate sharing, and this society never forgave a woman who dared to love outside the ritual. You once dreamed of leaving the temple, living like everyone else, to love, to be jealous, to get angry over soup that's too salty. But you didn't get to choose. You were chosen. And sometimes, being chosen is just a gentle way of saying, you are trapped. One time, sneaking up to the temple's top floor, where clay tablets recorded the names of Entu through the years, you stumbled upon something strange. Some names were chiseled off, not by time, but intentionally. An elder whispered to you, those were the ones who loved the wrong person. They once laughed outside of ritual, and now, no one speaks of them. You stared at those erased names like scars on the wall of history. A person who once lived, breathed, loved, but now even their name is forgotten by the wind. Mesopotamia didn't document those who broke ritual. It simply erased them. Some nights had no moon, no festival, no drums or chants. But guards still knocked on your door. They whispered, eyes averted. The priest says, the goddess Inanna requires another embodiment. You draped your robe, walked barefoot through the dark temple halls. No poetry awaited you, no bowl of honey. Only a man, a priest or high-ranking guest, already seated, weary, reeking of old wine. You lay down, heard fabric brushing against stone, and reminded yourself, this is for the nation, the crops, the rivers. But deep in your belly you knew, this was no longer a ritual. This was sanctioned assault in the name of a god. And the next morning, like every other, You stood among other entu, hands clasped, mouths singing hymns of the goddess's purity. You don't work in a temple. You're not called wife of the god. You don't have the right to attend seasonal rituals. No one carves your name onto clay tablets. You are just a prostitute, and your workplace is a tavern. Ancient Babylon didn't hide desire, it sold it. Openly, with receipts, with a price list. Just like people weighed grain, measured oil, calculated salt taxes, sex had an exchange value too, in silver, in grain, or even fresh goat meat. You sit in the tavern, hair purposefully messy, lips tinted with red clay. Every man who walks in looks at the wooden board on the wall, listing services in blunt clarity. Sit together, 1 shekel. Hug, 2 shekels. Full package, 4 shekels. Add a whisper, plus 1 goat meat. No one blushes. This is the first legal sex market on earth. And you are the seller. You are not allowed to love. Love is a loss. Love is a waste of time. Love messes with market prices. Once, in the tavern's back kitchen, filled with broken jars and cracked bricks, you accidentally found a piece of a clay tablet, the script already faded. Someone had written by hand, "I used to be the star of the tavern, until he chose the new girl on a cold, rainy day." You ran your hand across the tablet's surface, felt the scratches like fingernail marks, then burned hot and silently buried under ash. No one knows who she was. She no longer has a name, but you understand. This is the trace of a love that came at the wrong time, and of a woman who once dreamed more than the market allowed. You learn how to speak sweetly at different levels. Warm voice for nobles, soft voice for drunk men, moderate voice for first-timers. You smile based on the weight of silver. You moan by the taste of wine. You know you're not pretending, because pretending is also a skill that's included in the price. Every day, you count silver with your fingernails and count bruises with hot water. Some days, you earn enough to buy new linen. Some days, you have to walk home because a client stole your hair tie. But it's okay. You're still freer than temple girls. No one calls you wife of a god. You don't represent anyone but yourself. Still, in Babylon's world, prostitutes had their own ranks. You've heard. Tavern girls like you are the lowest class, working in noisy places, protecting yourselves. Street girls have no price list, but they carry blades hidden in their belts. Some lucky prostitutes were sponsored by nobles. They wore silk, didn't sit in taverns, only met clients at private homes. And the highest, of course, were entu, temple girls, who didn't need to be priced because they were considered sacred. You once saw an entu pass by the street, carried in a sedan chair, eyes looking at no one. She didn't smile, but you wonder, maybe she used to be you, the only difference being someone wrote her a prettier story. There's a very strange law, carved into stone. If a prostitute refuses service, the man is not allowed to strike her. Hammurabi's Code, Law 137. You used to tap that line softly every time a drunk man tried to cross the line. Not for protection, but to remind him, you're a citizen too. No one believes prostitutes have rights, but the stone says so. Sometimes someone asks you, have you ever truly loved? You just smile, pour more beer, and answer, once, and I included the cost of washing my face the next morning. You're not sad, you're just older than your dreams. Babylon eventually fell to ruin. The tavern became a pile of bricks. Price boards cracked in half. But you believe in every shard of pottery your shadow remains. A woman who sold love, but never sold her dignity. You don't wear makeup. You don't wear long, thin silk dresses like Athenian girls. You don't dance with scarves at banquets. Don't play the lyre. Don't frown prettily. You are moved. You are a Spartan woman. And sometimes you are a nude athlete, not to show skin, but because Sparta believes a strong body hides nothing. During the Heraea festival, you race in front of the whole village, bare-chested, hair tied high, your sweat shining like bronze. The winner gets wine. The loser still gets love poems. Some girls even carved poems on stone to send to warriors they liked. If you're fast enough to catch me on the training ground, I'll be yours, at least for a night. Sparta trains you to run from age 7, climbing hills, throwing discs, stripping, hurling javelins, and most importantly, looking a man in the eye without blinking, because in Sparta, women are not for looking at. Women are breeding furnaces for warriors. The homeland needs soldiers. To get good soldiers, you need good mothers. And to birth future heroes, you must be stronger than a stallion. So every morning, instead of brushing your hair, you run naked around the temple of Artemis. The boys watch, laugh, but don't dare tease. Because you once hit a guy's butt with a spear tip for calling you honey bun. You are not a slave. You own land. You can read. You can own property. Manage the household when your husband goes to war. And sometimes, choose a lover if your husband is too weak. Your husband knows that. And usually, agrees. Because honestly, you don't pick the best guy. You pick the easiest one to control, the quieter, the tamer, the easier to write into your will. Some older women in the village even have a checklist. Whoever can hold a spoon, grow vegetables, and doesn't have smelly feet, marry him. One girl once scoffed, "Spartan men go to battle, and me, I choose a husband like I choose a weapon. Lightweight, easy to hide, easy to replace. The night before your wedding, you are kidnapped, not by enemies, but by older women in the village. They bring you into a dark room, shave your head, dress you in men's clothing, then let the husband in. No candles, no music, no ceremony, just the wind hissing through the cracks and 2 grown adults without instruction. Sparta doesn't like sentimentality. Love each other. Great. Don't love? That's fine too. The state only needs you to produce sons, and as many as possible. While pregnant, you still exercise. When giving birth, no one helps. If the baby is weak, they leave it on the mountain. Not out of hate, but by law. Sparta keeps only the strong breed. Once, you take your son to the city gate, and he asks, "What's out there?" You smile. "Your father and 300 men in red cloaks. Go see." He asks again, "What if they don't come back?" You put your arm around him, pour a little lion's blood into his ear. Then someday, you'll go too, and if you don't return, come back on your shield or on top of it. You're not sad, you're taught. Spartan mothers don't cry unless their sons live in shame. An Athenian once wrote, "Spartan women are rude, have no shame." You read it, then toss the manuscript into the fire, smirking. At least we don't live as parasites. You're not a poet, not a geisha. You are a Spartan woman, and sometimes you don't even bother marrying, because you have land. Young soldiers line up with proposals, and you have the right to reject them all. Some Spartan women are so rich they never marry. They just invite soldiers over to train their bodies in autumn, then send them back to camp before the leaves fall. Your friend, Myra, owns 3 houses, 10 vineyards, and a notebook listing the warriors she slept with reviews like, "Good, but talk too much." In Sparta, chastity is a virtue. But the right to choose, now that's power. A warrior without a sword, but who gave birth to an army. People remember Leonidas, but you remember Leonidas's mother, the one who tore her dress, stood before the council and said, "If you don't go to war, I'll stab you myself. Better to die with honor than live in shame with a cowardly son." And they obeyed her. You wake up in a room full of books, none of which belong to you, because you are a prostitute, but not the street corner kind. You are a hetera, a high-class escort, the kind who can deliver a lecture and critique political satire. In Athens, respectable women are not allowed to leave the house, not allowed to study, not allowed to speak at banquets, not allowed to look at men except their husbands, and even then, only by looking down. Respectable women live like expensive pottery, displayed in the corner, not to be touched. You are different. You were educated, not at school, but in rooms more expensive than any library. You learned how to pause between verses, how to distinguish Plato from Aristophanes, and how to sit upright for 3 hours without sighing once. Your first teacher, a retired hetera, taught you. Men will let you talk philosophy as long as you know when to shut up and pour wine. You speak, you sing, you parody Euripides, analyze the ethics of Socrates, and sometimes correct your client's grammar mid-climax. People pay you to laugh, and maybe to rest their heads in your lap and mumble about how democracy is rotten. You once lay beside a famous politician, the same one who voted to execute your favorite philosopher. He whispered, "I didn't want to kill Socrates, but the people demanded it." You didn't answer. You just pulled your robe shut, as if to wrap up the conversation. You know more than the priests. Once, a noble woman, the wife of a jurist, hired someone to dump feces at your door. Her husband once wrote you love poems. A month later, you were summoned to court for distorting the moral standards of the state. You stood there, no lawyer, no defense, only the cautious eyes of those who had once lain in your arms. The trial ended when you smiled and said, "I didn't distort, I reflected." But no one wrote your name in the annals. You were not allowed to marry, not allowed to have children, and if you did, you had to pretend they were your servants. They call you a whore. But you know, some nights, it was you who comforted the greatest minds in Athens when they couldn't find the answers in books. One time, you walked into a symposium, a men-only drinking party, and the room went silent. Not because your dress was thin, but because you had just written the satire of Cleon so sharp, people had memorized it. You once met Aspasia, the only woman allowed into the assembly through the front door. They said she was Pericles' wife, but you knew she rewrote half of the funeral oration praising Athens, and she was the first to teach you. In Athens, a woman's words only carried weight when they didn't carry her husband's name. Some kissed your hand like a teacher. Some envied you like a wife. You weren't more beautiful than their wives, but you knew how to ask the right questions and when to keep quiet. One night, A young philosopher, you forgot his name but remember his eyes, asked you, "Do you believe the soul can reincarnate?" You lifted your wine cup, smirked. "Of course. Proof is that I've had to relive this life every time the sun goes down. An intellectual courtesan, a woman without a grave, without a bronze statue. Only memories, in a few old poems, a few misnamed statues, a few stories that begin. One night, I met a woman. You have nothing. Only one thing. Freedom. Bought with the very name you'll never see carved in stone. You stand before a rotting wooden door where someone has scratched, Cave Canem. Beware of the dog. But there's no dog. Only you and your profession, officially registered by the state. You are a meretrix, an officially registered prostitute of Rome. The first day you entered the lupanar, the licensed brothel, you were led to a cold brick room where an older woman was waiting. No smile, no introduction. She placed a wine jug, a roll of linen, and a bronze coin on the table. "First thing, learn to love no one," she said. You thought you'd be taught seduction, touch. But no, the first lesson was about how to keep your gaze blank, how to hear breathing without reacting, and how to wipe blood off the bedsheet like it was grape juice. She pointed at a foggy mirror and said, "In here, if you still see yourself in the mirror, you're not ready for this job. There's a file. Your name is on the tax registry, and if you're lucky, you might even get a second-class citizen number. In Rome, this job isn't banned. On the contrary, it's priced." You remember your first time applying at the edil, the office of the city magistrate. They asked, your name? Your age? Have you ever worked as a Greek courtesan? Do you lean more toward Dionysian or Venusian service? You smiled, not because you were happy, but because you understood. From now on, you are no longer a person. You are a tax-stamped product. Every month you have to pay the vectigal, the prostitution tax, charge per head, not based on holidays. If you work in a lupanar, your owner deducts the tax first. If you work freelance, you pay it yourself. Miss 2 cycles and you're fined. 3, you lose the right to work. 4, you're considered a tax evader and could be sold back as a slave. You once heard about a girl who got branded meretrix fraudulenta, deceitful prostitute, right on her forehead. But that wasn't the worst part. You once served an officer, gentle demeanor, educated voice. 3 months later, he was convicted of treason. You were summoned for questioning, because once you saw a map slip out from his coat. You only remembered a small scar behind his left ear, not a secret code, just human skin and memory that didn't know when to shut off. From then on, everyone knew. She once tried to live like an honest person. But don't think having a tax ID means happiness. You were forbidden from wearing long dresses like noble women. Forbidden from wearing a veil. Only virgins could cover their faces. And especially forbidden from filing lawsuits if a client beat you. Because Roman law made it clear. A prostitute has sold her body. She cannot claim honor. You once knelt before a praetor, a Roman judge. The man who assaulted you was a low-ranking officer. He said, "She accepted the money." You whispered, "I didn't accept the shame." The judge chuckled, "But shame isn't listed on the receipt. You once fell in love." A poor poet, but a good listener. He wrote you a song, and once almost took you out of the city, planning to run away. But you said no, because you knew Freedom isn't leaving. Freedom is daring to stay, while everyone else looks at you with eyes cast down. One night, you left the Lupanar before sunrise, walked across the forum, saw the statue of Caesar, the man who once imposed taxes on prostitutes to rebuild the temple. You laughed. At least that temple was raised with money from my body. And you kept walking. No need for anyone to remember your name. Just needing, each month, to still afford the tax. Then you know you're still alive. Your room is smaller than a horse stall. In fact, it used to be a horse stall. There is no door, just a dirty curtain the color of dried blood, and the constant sound of footsteps passing through the stone hallway. You are a Lupanar prostitute, the lowest tier in Rome's prostitution system. In Pompeii, more than 30 rooms like this were found, covered in graffiti on the walls. Not murals, just client names, position symbols, and reviews as if you were a dish being rated. One wrote, "Thalia was great, but needed more salt." You are not listed in the citizen registry. You cannot choose clients. You have no days off. You work 12 hours a day. But sometimes there are nights that last through the second watch, when clients come continuously. The Lupanar operates on a set schedule, from sunset to sunrise. This is Rome, where hunger never sleeps. Your room contains exactly 3 items: a stone bed built into the wall, covered in dry straw, a small oil lamp, and a mural depicting the preferred position for clients who like creativity. You don't need to clean. No one asks you to set the mood. Just surviving until the next client is enough to qualify for the job. One day, you tried counting. In a single watch, there were 6 men. One was drunk, one was silent, one cried, one mumbled about his wife, one called you by his mother's name, and one said nothing, just left the coin pressed between your fingers and walked away. You couldn't remember a single face, but you clearly remember. The straw on the left side of the bed had been stained with blood since the 3rd round. No one asks if you're okay. Only one person, a new girl from Sicilia, once whispered to you between clients, "Do you think, if we faked death, we'd get a break?" You replied, "Even dead, you still owe 2 more tax cycles." Both of you laughed, then went silent because you heard the next footsteps. Lupanar prostitutes aren't allowed to dress nicely. You wear a fabric belt, easy to undo quickly. Hair must not be tied high. Once, a client strangled a prostitute using her bun. Nails must be cut short. Your mouth can't have a smell, but mouthwash is too expensive. You use vinegar mixed with water. If you get beaten, you can't scream. If you bleed, you wipe it yourself. If you're exhausted, you endure it. The brothel owner only cares about the number of clients per day. And if you're too weak, you'll be sold to a cheaper Lupanar, the kind that only serves slaves and soldiers. You once lay still after a long night, hands still trembling, stomach aching as if someone had stabbed you from the inside out. 3 days earlier, a drunk soldier dragged you out of the Lupanar, shouting that he would rescue you from this dark life. He took you to a temporary hut in the barracks, where you slept on dirt floors, ate mouldy bread, and waited for him to sober up. 3 days later, he dropped you back at the brothel door, with a torn dress, messy hair, and an unnamed bruise on your neck. No one asked where you'd been. You just bowed your head, picked up your old belt, and quietly returned to the room with no door. You heard From the hallway, the soft singing of another girl, a thin voice but steady, an old Greek song. I am a flower growing by the ditch. I bloom, though no one picks me. You smiled, not because you were happy, but because you understood you weren't dead yet. And so the next morning, you sat up again, wiped the blood from your thigh, drew the curtain, and waited for the first client to walk in. You think being a prostitute is the lowest rung in society. Wait until you hear about Messalina. Yes, Valeria Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, Roman Empress, the officially recognized woman behind the throne. Once snuck out of the palace at night, slipped into a low-class brothel in the Suburra district, used a fake name, stood next to common prostitutes, and competed for clients just to win a bet about sexual endurance. Not a rumor. It's recorded history, written by Tacitus, Suetonius, and Juvenal. One night, whispered about by Suburra's prostitutes, she showed up in a dull brown dress, her hair loose and messy, with a strange scent that wasn't expensive. Her name that night was Lupina. She didn't ask for a private room. She fought for clients like everyone else. One prostitute recalled, she didn't say anything, just smiled every time a client moaned, like she was scoring points. She slept with each man, not rushed, not distracted. Until the girl in the next bed passed out from exhaustion, and Messalina kept going. The doorman said, I saw her stand up just before dawn, not tired, just fixed her hair and left before the sun rose. A bet, or a way to test control over her own body? No one knows. Only this is known. The next day, Rome was still Rome, and the Empress still wore her crown like it never slipped. In Roman history, it wasn't rare for royal women to be rumoured as selling their bodies for power, or using their bodies to bargain in politics. Some were accused of being sacred prostitutes, like the Vestal Virgins, though discovery could mean death. In one ancient record, Vestal Virgin Cornelia was executed just for being suspected of having a lover. Just suspected, no proof needed. She was blindfolded, taken to an underground chamber, and buried alive, as ritual demanded. They said, it's not a death sentence. We're simply leaving her with the gods. That death was as silent as a breeze at night. No one was allowed to cry. Others, like Julia the Elder, daughter of Augustus, were exiled to islands for loose behavior in public gardens. But Messalina was unique, not because she was lustful, but because she used sex as a weapon of competition. The story of her sleeping with more than 25 men in one night to prove the Empress's capability wasn't legend. On the other side, there's Cleopatra, not a prostitute in the traditional sense, but imagine a night in Alexandria, in a room lit by oil lamps, the scent of myrrh resin blending with sea breeze. Cleopatra didn't wear sheer silk, she wore knowledge. In her hands were cadastral maps of Egypt, agricultural tax reports, and a list of Roman generals likely to betray Caesar. That woman didn't seduce with her body. She made men lose sleep over her strategy. A royal advisor of Egypt once said so. Cleopatra walked into Caesar's room, not to kneel, but to negotiate. And when he looked at her, he didn't see a body. He saw a nation. But Rome's history called her many names, from whorish queen to political courtesan. Cleopatra understood the power of seduction. She learned Greek, Latin, Egyptian, and even the language of body. She approached Caesar, then Antony, not just with her body, but with intellect and emotional control. And because of that, Rome hated her. History is written by the victors. To Rome, any woman who controls men through desire was labeled prostitute. Whether she was an empress or a goddess, the real question wasn't, did they sell their bodies, but rather, who bought power from their compromises? And you, if born into a Roman noble family, probably wouldn't be allowed to choose who to love, only allowed to use your body to trade for a bit of safety, or status, or the survival of a family rotten in political infighting. And so, you don't stand on the street, you stand in the Golden Palace, but your price is still set by men. Not all prostitutes live in the lupanar. Some sleep on the emperor's embroidered pillows. Not every woman who sold her body stayed in the lupanar. Some crossed mountains, marched through deserts, and followed the Roman army. You think Roman soldiers only carried swords, shields, and salt? Wrong. They also carried what was called night firewood, without needing to light a flame. These were nameless women, unrecorded in official camp ledgers. But they were there, among the tents, behind wooden fences, in the hoarse laughter of drunken soldiers. They weren't wives, because military law forbade soldiers from marrying while in active service. They weren't slaves. Some followed voluntarily. Some were professional prostitutes, moving from city to city. Others were fiancés, old lovers, even local women following the troops just to survive. And every time the army set up camp, small animal hide tents would rise, not far from the command center. They had no official name. They were simply called warm tents. At night, when soldiers returned from battle, when screams still echoed in their heads, they came to these women, not for love, but to feel like they were still alive. A woman from Gallia once said, "He held me like if he let go, he'd vanish into the air." Some were trampled during midnight marches. Some died on open fields, names forgotten. Some gave birth in forests, while soldiers built fortifications. And some, like Flavia, a prostitute who followed the army all the way to Britannia, survived 3 winters, then disappeared when the army marched home. Her name was scrawled into a stone near Hadrian's wall. F. Dormivit hic. Flavia slept here, permanently. Military history often praises heroic generals, brilliant formations, gleaming tactics, but rarely mentions the women who march beside them, unarmed, unnamed, unburied. They didn't win battles, they just claimed a temporary place to sleep, next to a temporary man. And in many cases, they were the reason Roman soldiers didn't go mad. Some even became spies. At a border camp near Dacia, stories told of a woman named Alia, said to be illiterate, spoke with a local accent, and always washed Roman soldiers' hair when they were drunk. No one noticed her. But one night, after a young officer was assassinated, guards found his wooden tag etched with the names of 3 officers carved backwards. The carving matched the teeth of Alia's comb. She vanished before sunrise, left behind a tuft of hair, and 3 confessions written in burnt charcoal beneath the officer's bed. No one dared speak her name again, with just a hug, a whisper in the night, or simply, by being there when no one else would be. One winter night, the camp was forced to retreat in a sudden snowstorm. Amid the chaos, one woman was left behind. No one knew, no one returned. 3 weeks later, at a new camp, A soldier planted a crude stick into the ground, tied to it an old leather bracelet and a line carved with a small knife. If you're gone, how do I know I'm still human? Not everyone called them prostitutes, but everyone knew they marched with the army, and because of them, the army marched farther. In ancient Rome, prostitution didn't just exist, it existed with ranks, classifications, and fixed price lists. You thought that only came after the 20th century. Surprise. Even under the Roman Republic, there was a near industrial level hierarchy of sex work. And you'll be stunned, because from the girl on the market corner to the poetess whispered about at the emperor's dinner, all had their own code within Rome's heart. 1. Lowest rank, Meretrix Stabulina. This group was known as stable girls, literally. They worked inside abandoned horse stalls or under staircases, where soldiers, poor citizens and slaves could pay a very low price to relieve pressure. Their names weren't recorded. A shift could last up to 10 to 12 clients, with an average price of 2 as not even worth a good loaf of bread. They were taxed but not protected. And most died young, from disease, violence, or simply being forgotten. At the ruins of the Lupana in Pompeii, graffiti scratched into stone walls reads, Lucilla, 2 as, reverse horse ride, no drunk clients. Another, Fortuna, 1 as, if you bring bread. They had no paper price lists, only stone, and time to wear down what little remained. 2. Middle class, Meretrix Candida, registered prostitutes. This group had real names, tax numbers, and often a fixed place of work. They rented rooms above taverns or tiny spaces near public baths. Their clients were craftsmen, aging soldiers, low-level officials. Some could sing, tell jokes. A few even wrote bits of poetry. On a good day, they could earn 5 to 10 denarii, especially if they had regulars and knew how to please. Some of them were booked weekly, under informal contracts. No strangers. 1 exclusive client. A record mentions a prostitute named Sabina, hired by a magistrate for 30 days, paid in advance with 3 jars of olive oil and a new pair of sandals. When he left, she carved the following into a wall near the forum. He wore soft sandals, but his heart wasn't. 3. High-end, Lupe and Delicate. Lupe, she-wolves, were sought after for unique looks or undisputed skills. Delicate were elite. They recited poetry, played the lyre, spoke Greek, and never entertained clients without a proper banquet. They didn't serve in single rooms, but lived in small villas, received slaves as gifts, and even had personal makeup attendants. Seneca once wrote in a private letter, "There are women who speak to the emperor in verse and disrobe through philosophy." A prostitute named Thalia was famous for only accepting clients who correctly answered her question. How can one live well knowing death is certain? Answer incorrectly, she poured wine and sent them away with the line, "Tonight you'll sleep with your own fear." 4. The invisible rank, private courtesans of emperors and aristocrats. No one recorded their names in tax books. No one dared call them whores. But everyone knew they were summoned as learned women. They discussed Virgil's poetry with the emperor, then engaged in practical physiology in the palace library. Some became long-time lovers, had their portraits carved, even received a line in the emperor's will. If you were a sex worker in ancient Rome, your dream wasn't love, it was promotion. From stable loft to marble salon, it only took 1 powerful regular and one night breathing at the right rhythm. And sometimes, history only remembers the historians. In Claudius's tax records, there's an entry marked L93, a freelance worker, name unregistered, but paid taxes 3 times consecutively in the Subura district. No one knows who she was, but when a great fire burned the district down, a copper bracelet was found in the ashes, engraved with, "Served the empire, lived as if chosen." Those who wrote with their bodies were erased unless they climbed to the top rung. Rome didn't hide this industry, it just ranked it clearly. Like every empire, it had laws, classes, desire, and tragedies buried in silence. What level you belong to, not everyone got to choose, but everyone started with a look. If you think religious festivals are for prayers and wearing solemn robes, then welcome to Dionysia and Saturnalia, where madness was sanctified and every boundary was loosened to the point that even a clothing strap couldn't withstand the pressure. 1. Dionysia, when wine, theatre and the body melted together in Greece. The Dionysia festival was held annually to honor Dionysus, the god of wine, theatre and everything earthly. During the day, people watched tragedies. At night, they dressed up as half-man, half-goat creatures, carried ivy branches, and screamed in parades as if reborn by wine. Prostitutes weren't just allowed to participate, they were invited. They embodied the Menades, the wild priestesses who followed Dionysus, spinning like whirlwinds, hair loose, eyes blurred by wine smoke. There's a record of a Dionysia in Thebes where 3 prostitutes sang a verse of Sappho before climbing onto the altar, stripping off their clothes and declaring, "This is my body, this is the sacrifice." No one stopped them, because that night belonged to the god, and the god wanted liveliness more than morality. A terracotta chronicle from the 3rd century BCE recounts, at a Dionysia in Corinth, a prostitute named Myrene became a Menad, danced so intensely that she slipped and fell amidst the spinning crowd. She was trampled to death, the trumpets and cheers still echoing. But the people didn't abandon her. They placed her body at the foot of Dionysus's temple, carving into a rough stone. She died at her most alive, the wine still warm, hands still reaching. No one remembered her face, only her name remained, and the way she fell, like a radiant offering in the chaos of the god. 2. Saturnalia. When all order was reversed in Rome, Saturnalia was when servants became masters, slaves feasted, and prostitutes could sit at the philosopher's table. Usually lasting from December 17th to 23, Saturnalia was a week of chaos, joy, and freedom. Low-tier prostitutes were allowed to shed their clothes, dress up as noble women, and declare themselves the consul's wives, at least until sunrise. A famous story tells of Flavia, a prostitute from the Subura district, who beat 3 nobles in a Greek poetry contest and was awarded a laurel wreath. She wore it home, climbed onto her roof tiles and shouted, "Saturn doesn't need virgins. He needs those who know how to live before they die." In her house, after the festival, a small wooden box was found containing over 40 paper scraps, all handwritten letters, love confessions from men who had slept with her, but only dared to say, "I miss your laugh," during Saturnalia. No one threw stones. Only confetti, wine, and bursts of laughter from nowhere in particular. 3. When prostitution became temporary religious ritual, an inscription from the Ephesus region notes, In the year 145 before the Common Era, a special festival game was held called Turning the Sun. In this game, prostitutes were invited to dress up as priestesses of Vesta or Demeter, stand before the public, and bestow blessings of the body. In return, the real priestesses had to play prostitutes, wear wigs, don thin robes, and call out symbolic prices to experience the lowest yet truest fate of women. One priestess later wrote, "I didn't expect to tremble like that when doing what so many women are forced to do every day. I prayed, not for me, but for those never chosen to be sacred." In both festivals, prostitutes, often scorned all year, became the emotional leaders of the crowd. They didn't just serve, they lit the fire. Not with their bodies, but by reminding others that they too once lived wildly, danced freely, believed that the body could be a form of prayer. In the time of Dionysus and Saturn, morality stepped down, and prostitutes didn't have to speak softly. It was the rare week when they weren't called by price, but by name. And sometimes, just one such night was enough for a person to survive the long, cold winter. Not everyone forgot. In the darkness of buried memories, there were still whispers, written in iron, carved with fingernails, or simply left behind on a wall no one wiped clean. This chapter belongs to those who returned. 1. A letter searching for someone named Daphnis. At the Herculaneum Library, on a piece of scorched paper, someone found a line. "I have returned from the battlefield. If you're alive, leave a handprint on the statue of Venus. I will wait every Tuesday morning. Forever, Aulus." No one knows if Daphnis ever left her print. But the statue of Venus nearby, on its base, had a small handprint made of ash, as if someone once touched it, and vanished. 2. Wall carving in a brothel. In Pompeii, inside a small brothel, on the wall near a stone bed, there was a line carved, "Marcia, the only one who didn't laugh for money. If I had one more day to live, I'd buy her a garden. But now I only have this line. Forgive me." That line was never erased. An archaeologist marked it as one of the rare signs of remorse in the ruins of desire. 3. A late confession on a gravestone. In Ostia, a stone tomb once thought to belong to a merchant had, at the bottom, a handwritten line. "The one who lies here used to lull me to sleep, not with her voice, but by forgiving me each time I was drunk. She was a prostitute, but the only one who listened." No one knows who the man was, but by the 3rd century, a short Greek poem was copied from this tombstone and spread as far as North Africa. 4. Traces without names, but full of meaning. On Roman slave market pillars, there are repeated symbols, 3 slashes, a crescent moon, and a stone-carved exclamation mark. Some researchers believe these were left by prostitutes to signal to one another, "I'm gone, but I lived." A kind of journal by those who weren't allowed to write. Some symbols even had a man's name alongside them, like a warning. "Don't sleep with him. He hits." If you think history forgot them, not entirely. They're still there. In a scratch on a stone table, in a forgotten line at the end of a book, and sometimes in the heart of someone who silently returned, not to redeem, but just to say one last thing. "I remember you." If hell has an echo, it's not screaming. It's the sound of stories swallowed before they could be told. 1. The scroll in the dungeon beneath the Palatine found in a small cave, once used to imprison prostitutes who disobeyed tax orders, was an old piece of parchment, no author name. The contents were just a short passage, ink mostly faded. My name is Sevilla. I once had a mother. I once dreamed of learning to draw. I once believed someone would stay after sleeping with me. But every morning, it was just me, and blood I didn't dare to wipe. The final line was nothing but a broken trace, if someone reads this. 2. Dreams erased from history. They once dreamed of becoming weavers, storytellers, writers, but because they were born under an unknown father's name, they were recorded in the prostitute registry. A census record from 17 CE noted 20 women without valid birth documents sent to the lupanar. 3 showed signs of literacy, not worth keeping. The final line, not worth keeping, was circled in charcoal. 3. Echoes during the night of Saturnalia. During the festival, people wore masks, switched roles, laughed loudly. But in the brothel quarter, there was a silent ritual. The prostitutes would gather by a dry well and whisper their real names, just for that night. Not the names on their tax tags, but the names their mothers gave them. One woman recalled, I once heard 50 names whispered, but by morning no one remembered, because hell does not allow you to keep a name. 4. If they could speak, what would they say? Not stories of who slept with whom, not what a client paid, but I once helped a little girl hide from a beating. I once saved cake for the sick. I once dreamed of holding someone's hand in the street without getting stoned. If they were allowed to tell their stories, it wouldn't be a tragedy. It would be a declaration. I existed, not as a product, but as a person. And if you hear something whisper in your sleep tonight, maybe it's not the echo of hell. Maybe it's a plea to finish telling the story, just once, even if only by someone like you. Next story. Augustus, the first emperor of ancient Rome, the year 63, before the Common Era. A child is born into a chaotic Rome. The name Gaius Octavius was never meant to change history. But Rome, at the time, wasn't meant to leave anyone in peace either. In the autumn of the year 63 before the Common Era, the skies over Rome were thick with smoke and whispers. Just as people had managed to put out the fire in Subura, the city's most crowded slum, another assassination plot had erupted at the very gates of the Senate. Across every cobblestone street, dusty statues of gods looked down upon the masses, witnessing a society both confused and boiling. This was Rome, the capital of a republic gasping between the light of ambition and the shadows of civil war. And in that chaos, on September 23rd, a child let out his first cry. His name was Gaius Octavius Thurinus. No one paid attention. There was no prophecy. No comet streaked across the night sky. Just a baby born into the equestrian class, rich enough for an education, but not powerful enough to meddle in politics. His father, also named Gaius Octavius, had been a provincial official, once serving as governor of Macedonia. He died young while his son was still a child, leaving Octavius's mother, Attia, to raise him alone. Attia was no ordinary woman. She was the niece of Julius Caesar, a man climbing rapidly toward power, an ambitious general and, as history would show, unstoppable. Rome at the time was gripped by a lingering fear called Catilina. That year, Senator Lucius Sergius Catilina was accused of plotting to overthrow the Republic. Cicero, the greatest orator Rome ever knew, was elected consul, and with his shrewd tactics, crush the conspiracy in the nick of time. But behind the victory lay a crack that couldn't be sealed. Rome no longer trusted itself. Outside the city, generals like Pompey were off conquering the east. Inside, Caesar was quietly building a base of power, using feasts and debts to buy loyalty. Every corner of the city buzzed with factions tearing at each other like stray dogs over a bone. In such a world, what could a child with no father, no Caesar name, no command of legions, possibly do? The answer in the year 63 before the Common Era: grow up quietly. No one called Octavius an heir. No one thought he would become anything more than a minor politician, or perhaps a forgotten intellectual. Even his own mother probably just hoped he'd live a peaceful life. But history has its strange pranks. When all roads to power are blocked, only those unseen can slip through. Perhaps that child once looked up toward the Capitoline Hill, where the temple of Jupiter stood, and wondered, why are the fates of Romans always decided by loud, rich men? But he didn't speak. He watched. He learned. 30 years later, all the loud men were dead, and the name Gaius Octavius, now changed to Augustus, would be carved into stone, printed on coins, sung in poetry, and etched into the heart of an empire that was no longer a republic. But to reach that day, he had to grow up amid this rubble, silently, unmentioned, unchosen, and most importantly, unnoticed. Rome was in chaos, but sometimes it is in chaos that the seeds of order are planted. A child, someday, would call Rome by a new name, my empire. The year 44, before the Common Era, the death of Caesar and the shocking will, when a political father was stabbed 23 times in front of Pompey's statue, and a young man no one remembered stepped into the eye of history. March 15th, the year 44, before the Common Era. Rome woke up in the fog, but no one knew that morning would be the last morning of the Roman Republic as people had known it. On the steps of Pompey's theatre, under the dim light of an old hall, Julius Caesar, dictator, general, the father of the nation, was surrounded by 60 senators. They stabbed him with daggers, one blow at a time. There was no trial, no verdict read aloud, only silence, blood, and the shadow of Brutus, the man Caesar had once loved like a son. The news spread like fire on dry wind. The people panicked, the crowd split. Some celebrated, some wailed, and some simply stayed silent, as if they knew everything was just beginning. Among those silent ones was a young man named Gaius Octavius. At the time, he was in Illyricum, where Caesar had sent him for military training. Only 18 years old, he wasn't a general, had no private army, no faction. But then a message was handed to him, small, but enough to shake the very core of his heart's order. He chose you, in his will. Caesar left your name as his legal heir. From now on, you are Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. Doubt coiled like venomous snakes in the shadows. No one believed it. Why would a man who had never led troops, never spoken in the Senate, be Caesar's choice? Not Mark Antony, Caesar's right hand, not Lepidus, commander of the army, but a teenager, soft-spoken, sickly, with only a good memory and a habit of listening. When Octavian returned to Rome, Mark Antony refused to hand over Caesar's assets from the will. So this skinny young man, instead of backing down, began doing what no one expected, using his own private resources to pay Caesar's soldiers their bonuses, befriending those once loyal to Caesar by appearing weak, humble, but never foolish. Rallying hidden political forces, even stirring the crowds with public funeral shows that sparked both tears and fury. At Caesar's funeral, Octavian had something screened that Romans would never forget. An image of Caesar's bloody statue, his red-soaked corpse, paraded through the city. Those who killed Caesar thought they were restoring the Republic, but that very moment, amidst the mourning and the chant of Caesar is immortal, sowed the seeds of empire. Octavian, the heir no one expected, now held something Mark Antony could never claim: legitimacy, a name inscribed in the will, and the fire of emotion rising from the masses. In the year 44 before the Common Era, Rome plunged into chaos after the assassination. But beneath that smoke, something more terrifying than a political plot was taking shape. A young man who didn't rage, didn't retaliate, but waited, watched, and quietly began piecing together the shattered remains of power. In just 1 year, Octavian, who had never held any office, made Antony cooperate, made Lepidus yield, and forced the Senate to recognize him as a new political force, not through violence, but through the chilling precision of someone who understood. To rule Rome, you didn't need to seize the throne. You only needed to be named in the will the moment Caesar fell. The year 43 before the Common Era, the Second Triumvirate, and the organized massacre. When Caesar's blood had yet to dry, his heirs turned Rome into a stage of purges. No more ideals, only a list of names to be removed. 9 months after Julius Caesar's death, Rome had yet to recover from the shock. The crowds didn't know who to trust. The Senate wavered between factions. Antony took the army. Octavian took the public's favor. Lepidus took the quietest seat of them all. But then something happened. What history would call a lovely name, alliance. But in truth, it was a blood contract, the Second Triumvirate, signed in November of the year 43 before the Common Era, between 3 men: Octavian, 19 years old, Mark Antony, furious, and Lepidus, experienced but lacking brilliance. Unlike the first triumvirate of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, which had only been an informal agreement, this second triumvirate was written into law, sealed, and valid for 10 years. It allowed the three to govern all of Rome without the need for Senate approval. A 3-headed government, but with one frozen heart: avenge Caesar and eliminate anyone who stood in the way. And so the list was written. Not 1, not 10, but more than 300 senators, and over 2,000 equestrians were categorized as to be removed for the stability of Rome. The first name, ironically, was Cicero. Cicero, the great orator, the man who crushed the Catiline conspiracy, the one who condemned Mark Antony in a series of fiery speeches called the Philippici, now became a target. Octavian had once been his student, but that didn't matter. Politics is not about filial piety. Politics is about positioning, and Cicero's position now was in front of the blade. In December of the year 43 before the Common Era, Cicero was captured while trying to flee Italy. They cut off his head, along with the hands that had written those fierce speeches. His head was mounted on the Senate Speaker's platform. Beside it, his hands stretched out, a chilling warning. This is the price of free speech in the era of Caesar's chosen ones. The slaughter continued. Rome was split between those who lived in fear and those who lived by loyalty. Properties were confiscated. lands redistributed to veterans, opponents were killed or vanished. And in that sea of blood, 3 men, Octavian, Antony, Lepidus, sat down, shaking hands with fingers that had just signed death warrants. They didn't call it terrorism. They called it purification to save the Republic. But Octavian, at 19, wasn't quite like the other two. Antony was drunk on wine and power. Lepidus was drunk on position and safety. But Octavian, still thin, still quiet, was learning lessons from the blood of his own allies. To rule for the long term, one must eliminate not just enemies, but also those who stand beside you. The year 43 before the Common Era, was not just the beginning of an alliance, it was the beginning of a transformation. Rome stepped from political chaos into organized dictatorship, no longer cloaked in ideals, only a list, and if your name wasn't on it, you might be the next target. When allies turn into enemies, the final act of Cleopatra. When love wasn't enough to save an empire, and a woman who once made Caesar kneel had to die in a locked room. The triumvirate didn't last 10 years, not because of betrayal, but because of something even easier to kill than loyalty: ambition. In the year 42 before the Common Era, after the Battle of Philippi, the 2 murderers of Caesar, Brutus and Cassius, were dead. Antony and Octavian became heroes, dividing the world in half. Antony took the east, Octavian held the west, and Lepidus was reassigned to politically shepherd sheep in Africa. It seemed peace had arrived, but when Antony left Rome for Alexandria, he didn't just leave the city. He left Octavian, left the image of Caesar's heir, and fell into the arms of Cleopatra VII, the last queen of Ptolemaic Egypt. Cleopatra, the one who had once bewitched Caesar. Cleopatra, who needed no weapons, only a glance. And this time, she didn't come to Rome. She made Alexandria into another Rome, filled with wine, incense, and a completely different Antony. Antony began dressing Egyptian style, named his children with Cleopatra's sun and moon, and declared he would divide Roman lands among his children. Rome fell silent. Octavian smiled. He didn't need to do much. Just read Antony's will aloud before the Senate, in which Antony asked to be buried in Alexandria, named his children with Cleopatra as heirs, and gave most of the east to the living goddess Cleopatra. To the Romans, this was no longer love. It was treason with a pretty face. Octavian declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. He didn't call it a civil war. He called it a war against Egypt, and he marched in the name of protecting Rome from an Eastern woman. In the year 31 before the Common Era, at Actium, off the coast of Greece, Octavian's fleet faced the combined navy of Antony and Cleopatra. Antony had large ships. Cleopatra had Egypt's treasury. But Octavian had something they didn't: unity in anger. And Agrippa, Marcus Agrippa, Octavian's right hand, led the Roman fleet to surround, intercept, and suffocate. Cleopatra, panicked, withdrew mid-battle. Antony, love tied like a rope around his neck, followed her. The Battle of Actium ended when there was no battle left. Only shame and panic remained. A year later, Octavian's forces entered Alexandria. Antony, refusing to be captured, stabbed himself in the chest, and failed so badly he didn't die immediately. They brought him to Cleopatra. He died in her arms, like a tragedy written by history itself. Cleopatra, locked in the palace, knew it was over. She refused to become a trophy, refused to be paraded through Rome, and according to legend, chose death by venomous asp to preserve her image as the last queen, unbowed. Octavian entered the palace, found 2 cold corpses and 1 empty throne. He didn't cry, didn't curse, didn't sneer. He simply nodded, as if it had all been part of the plan. Cleopatra had once been the wind that tilted the Roman throne, but in the end, she died like all those who failed to understand. Rome doesn't love anyone for too long. Rome only stays loyal to the one still standing when the blood dries. Princeps, being emperor without calling yourself emperor. When the crown was hidden behind a humble cloak, and the ruler of the world called himself merely the first citizen. In the year 27 before the Common Era, Rome had no more wars, no more internal enemies, and no Egyptian queen left to blame. Antony was dead. Cleopatra was only a legend, and only one man held every legion, every treasury, every decision. Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. He could have declared himself king, taken the throne, worn the crown, painted his portraits across every temple, but he didn't. He walked into the Senate, humbly declared, "I return power to the state. I am just a citizen. Rome must remain a republic." And the Senate, with a touching confusion, begged him to keep power. So he accepted a small portion. The title Princeps Civitatis, first citizen. The title Augustus, the exalted sacred one. And a new political system named Principate. No throne, no royal court, no word emperor in official documents. Only Augustus, standing at the center of all institutions, yet never declaring himself their master. He held every legion, but was temporarily allowed to command them. He controlled the treasury, but only for administrative ease, will return it later. He ran the legal system, but still sat in the commoners' row in the Senate. It was the politics of invisibility, a kind of rule without violence, but made everyone understand. Without Augustus, Rome will fall back into civil war. In the year 27 before the Common Era, they said the Republic had been restored, but in truth, it was already dead, just buried with lilies instead of blood. Augustus began reforms, restructuring the army. A permanent standing army was created, not to protect Rome, but to protect him. Establishing the Praetorian Guard, a secret military unit protecting the emperor stationed inside the city. And they would become a nightmare for future rulers. Controlling the media, his statues were placed across the empire. Coins were minted with his face. Historians could only publish if they didn't call him an emperor. And when someone asked, "So what are you then?" he simply smiled and answered, "I am just the one keeping peace for Rome." And he truly did. From the year 27 before the Common Era began the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It lasted for 200 years. No more civil wars, no more generals vying for power. Only one first citizen, silent, firm, and knowing exactly what he held. Rome at that time was not ruled by the sword, but by stability, by the feeling that if Augustus died, no one would be calm enough to keep everything still. And so, he rewrote politics. No need to overthrow anyone. No need to claim an empire. Just pretend to be the humblest man, while holding every power, rebuilding Rome, marble instead of crude brick. When a grey city was dressed in marble, and a torn empire was stitched back together with statues, temples, and stories no one dared to doubt. Some say Augustus didn't conquer much land, but he conquered time, not with a sword, but with architecture, not with blood, but with white stone. That year, sitting on the Palatine Hill, where he lived, Augustus saw a different Rome, not the grey, cramped, smoky city with rough brick walls, but a city worthy of a thriving empire. And he said, "I found Rome a city of brick, and left it a city of marble. Marmoriam se relincere quam lateritiam accepisset." And he meant it. No proclamations, no banners or slogans, just building. Rome began to bloom, not with spring, but with marble. The Pantheon was rebuilt. The temple of Mars Ultor, the Avenger, was erected to remind Romans that Octavian had avenged Caesar. The Forum of Augustus rose next to the old one, as if he was writing a new chapter of history in stone. These weren't just temples, this was the language of power. No one argues with marble. It doesn't shout. It just stands for 1,000 years, reminding you who left it behind. Augustus wasn't just a builder. He was the architect of collective emotion. Rome under his rule was redesigned like a symmetrical poem. Streets restructured, sewers expanded, markets, arenas, and temples separated and defined. Gone was the chaotic Rome of the past. Every new corner was designed to make you look up. Look up and see a statue of Augustus. Look up and see the god Mars in the shape of an emperor. Look up and see the stories he wanted you to believe. Augustus wasn't naive as some thought. He knew, to rule forever, people had to believe in you forever. And art became the sweetest political weapon. Coins were minted with his face, forever young. Busts of him raised across provinces, even ones he never visited. Poetry under his patronage praised a glorious Rome, freshly made by his hands. Virgil wrote the Aeneid, an epic about the mythical origin of Rome. In it, Aeneas, ancestor of Rome, wasn't that different from Augustus. Only difference: one was myth, the other was self-made legend. When you walked through Rome in Augustus's time, you weren't just walking on stone. You walked on an idea. Every monument was a reminder. Every temple was a sticky note posted on the sky. This is where peace began. This is where Caesar was avenged. This is where Augustus walked, and no one forgot. Augustus didn't write many memoirs. He didn't need to. Rome was his memoir. Every column, every dome, every market corner bore his name, if not in words, then in feeling. Beauty is never innocent. And in Augustus's hands, it was a weapon that made people love, without realizing they'd been conquered. When he died, Romans wept, not just for losing an emperor, but for losing the one who turned their city from crude brick into a white stone dream, an empire of peace, and a border of blades inside was Pax Romana. Outside was blood, fire, and soldiers who never came home. Rome during Augustus's time was called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, and it was real. The city of Rome had no more civil wars. The streets were calm. Statues of Augustus stood silently, wind blowing through their stone hair. But just a few hundred miles from the center, you'd hear something else. The sound of bronze horns, the sound of steel meeting bone, the sound of screams in a language Rome called barbaric. Rome was peaceful, as long as you didn't live on the frontier, as long as you weren't a soldier, as long as you didn't wear the strange insignia of Legio non Hispana, as long as you weren't stationed in Germania. Germania, a name that sounds cold, even when spoken. Not because of the climate, but because it was the one hole Augustus couldn't patch. One of Augustus's greatest reforms was the creation of a standing army. No more contract soldiers for civil war. No more whoever's free, come fight. The Roman military was now a career, a lifetime, an identity. Roman soldiers lived in forts, took the name of their legion, served for 20 years, and when retired, were granted land on the frontier. Every step they took was the line between Rome and everything else. From 16 BC to around 6 AD, Augustus ordered the northern border expanded. He sent his two stepsons, Drusus and Tiberius, Livia's sons, to push into Germania. And they did. Drusus marched all the way to the Elbe River. Tiberius built a defensive line along the Rhine. Roman forts rose in the deep forests among howling wolves. It looked like victory was near. But Rome forgot one thing. The Germans had no capital to capture. They had forests. The Teutoburg forest, where Roman pride was torn apart with sticks and ambushes. 9 AD, the Varian disaster. A Roman governor named Publius Quintilius Varus was assigned to manage the newly conquered Germania. He believed everything was under control, that the locals would submit like the Gauls, like Hispania. But he didn't know that within his own army was a traitor. Arminius, a German who had been trained by Rome, given command. But he never forgot who he was, and so he led 3 legions into the forest and made sure none of them ever came back. Legions 17th, 14th, and 19 were completely annihilated. Varus committed suicide. The legion numbers were erased forever from Roman records. Roman bones remained beneath the trees where no grave markers stood. When news reached Rome, it was said Augustus banged his head against a wall, crying over and over, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." After Teutoburg, Rome never again tried to conquer Germania. The Rhine River became the final border, and Augustus, the man who expanded the empire to Egypt, had to accept that there was one land Rome couldn't tame with law and marble. Pax Romana, that sweet name, only existed because of fear and dried blood at the edge of the map. Augustus built temples, raised statues, but he also dug trenches, planted garrisons. The people lived in peace because someone else died for them every day in a place with no name on the map. Rome was never truly at peace. It was only quiet. At the center. 9 AD, the Teutoburg disaster. When barbarians swallowed 3 legions. When it wasn't Caesar stabbed in the back, but 3 entire legions struck from all sides. In the rain, in the forest, in pride choking on its own breath. Rome could dominate the entire Mediterranean, could force Egypt to kneel, could turn weapons into bronze statues. But in 9 AD, in the Teutoburg forest, the whole empire was swallowed in mud and blood. There was no arena there, no audience, only 3 Roman legions, and a trap built out of hatred. Opening act, a confident general, and a quiet traitor, Publius. Quintilius Varus, a Roman noble, was assigned by Augustus to govern the new province of Germania. He wasn't a fool, but he believed too much in Rome's reputation. Next to him was Arminius, a young Germanic leader, trained Roman style. Varus thought of him as a civilized native. But in truth, he was a native who never forgot who he was. And on one September day, he whispered, "There's a rebellion on the border. Our troops should enter the forest to suppress it early. Varus nodded. 3 legions, 17, 38, 19. More than 20,000 Roman soldiers marched into the Teutoburg forest. Teutoburg, not a battlefield, but a graveyard, not yet dug. You imagine a forest like a fairy tale. No, Teutoburg was a nightmare. Towering trees, heavy rain, mud up to the knees, a narrow path barely wide enough for a single cart. And Roman soldiers, in heavy armor, dragging supply wagons, moving in a formation long and fragile like a thread of silver. Then the first arrow flew. No battle cry, only the howl, the sound of the forest, and of those who stepped out from it. The Germans didn't fight like Rome. They fought like wolves, hiding, watching, cutting off small groups, blocking retreat paths, burning food wagons, then circling back to bite into the neck of each unit like it was their midnight feast. 4 days, and a truth more bitter than ashes. The ambush lasted 4 days. No reinforcements, no signal flares, only despair and rain. The Roman troops couldn't form battle lines. Steel armor turned into drowning suits. Horses died, men screamed. The ground soaked in blood until you couldn't tell road from corpse. Varus, seeing the battle beyond saving, took his own life, not out of courage, but because he couldn't bear the humiliation of being captured alive. And then, silence. When the Teutoburg forest fell silent again, 3 legions had vanished from the map. No one survived to tell the story. Only Arminius, alive, smiling, and heads mounted on rotting spears in the woods. The empire lost over 20,000 soldiers. 3 legions, 17, 38, 19, were wiped out forever, never reformed, never mentioned. Just a slow-burning shame lasting centuries. When news reached Rome, Augustus didn't cry. He hit the wall. They say when Augustus heard the news, he slammed his head against the wall of his bedroom, crying and repeating, "Varus, give me back my legions. Varus, give me back my legions." A Roman emperor, who never called himself emperor, curled up like a father mourning his children. The final border. After that, Augustus didn't retaliate. He didn't strike back. He didn't build more statues. Rome withdrew from Germania. The Rhine River became the final frontier. "Varus, give me back my legions." A cry of despair. An emperor who conquered the world, yet stood helpless before a forest and the memories he could never summon back. Rome was once a heroic anthem, but by the end of Augustus's life, it had become a sorrowful lullaby. A lullaby for those who left without their shields. And at the heart of that melody was a choked whisper, echoing from 9 AD until the day he died. "Varus, give me back my legions." That sentence was not meant for anyone, because Varus was dead, the legions were lost, and Augustus had nothing left but an empire aging with him. A man who built an empire and wondered what he destroyed Augustus. The man who once sat in the forum and said, "I found Rome built of bricks and leave her clothed in marble." Now sat alone. No statues, no victory trumpets. Just a map with a painful blank. Germania. No Roman road was ever paved through it. No statue of Jupiter ever stood guard. Only forest and bones and memories he couldn't replace with marble. The heir who never grew up. He didn't just lose legions. He lost the ones he had hoped would carry on his legacy. Marcellus, his nephew, died young. Gaius and Lucius, his beloved grandsons, died just as they came of age. Drusus, Livius' son, died on the battlefield. The only one left was Tiberius, the surviving stepson, whom he never truly loved. He summoned Tiberius back, but it wasn't a choice. It was surrender, a mighty empire, and no one truly chosen to inherit it, only someone who remained, a king without a throne, dying in silence. Augustus never called himself emperor. He was princeps, first citizen, a humble title, but power without limit. He never demanded a crown. But by the end he realized the real loss wasn't a throne, it was memory. Memory of a victory that never came. Memory of 3 legions that never came home. Memory of a sentence he never stopped whispering in the dark. Varus, give me back my legions. An empire feared barbarians, but Augustus feared the ghosts in the forest even more. Not the ghosts of enemies, but of those who believed in him, who died for him, and whom he couldn't protect. And then, a light went out. On August 19th, 14 AD, Augustus died. He was deified. A temple was built. He was praised as the one who brought peace to Rome. But if you listen closely, amid the chants and honors, you'll hear a sentence no one mentions, yet never vanished. Varus, give me back my legions. Not a command, not an accusation, just an apology too late, sent to names that no longer exist, and to forest clearings where no one dares raise a gravestone. The sons who never grew up, an empire needs an heir. But Augustus had only names half carved on tombstones. When Augustus rebuilt Rome in marble, he wasn't only thinking of the present, he was thinking of the future, of someone who could walk the path he had bled to open. But then he looked around and saw only graves smaller than the throne he sat on. Marcellus, the golden nephew, dead while the dream still wore its cloak. First came Marcellus, his biological nephew, son of his sister Octavia, a boy Augustus loved nearly like his own son. He married off his daughter, Julia, to Marcellus, built a theatre in his name. People whispered, "This is the chosen one." But in 23 BC, Marcellus suddenly died at just 19 years old. No victory, no monument, only a mournful poem Virgil wrote in the Aeneid. Oh, poor child, you would have been great had fate allowed it. Rome wept. Augustus did not cry. He moved on to seek another heir, as if Marcellus had never existed. Gaius and Lucius, 2 stars that vanished mid-sky of Augustus. Next came Gaius and Lucius Caesar, sons of Julia with her second husband. Augustus officially adopted them, taught them to speak like senators, put them on coins, called them the Hope of Rome. Both were given titles, sent to far provinces to learn rule. But then, Lucius died in 2 AD in Gaul, barely 20. Gaius died in 4 AD from wounds during a mission in the east. Augustus, now nearly 70 years old, stood before 2 coffins of the future. No poems this time, only silence. Silence as cold as marble. Drusus, the one who won hearts, but not fate. Drusus, the son of his wife, Livia. A warrior, a nobleman with talent, brother of Tiberius. The only man who once said, Rome should no longer expand by war. Drusus marched into Germania, paving a road to the Elbe, the same land where later 3 legions would be swallowed. In 9 BC, Drusus fell from his horse, wounded. He died shortly after, only 29 years old. Augustus went all the way there, held Drusus's body. Perhaps that was the last time he touched something real. And then, only Tiberius remained. No one he loved remained alive. The only one left was Tiberius, a man he once didn't want to choose. reserved, cold, lacking grace. But Tiberius was alive, and Augustus, a dreamer of legends, had no choice but to give Rome to someone so practical it hurt. An empire with no true heir. If you asked Augustus what he feared most, he wouldn't say barbarians or failure or death. He feared Rome after him would have no one left to love, no one close enough to continue, no one who could call him father without feeling distant. When Augustus died, he left behind an empire. But what he truly wished to leave behind, the children, the eyes that could call him father, were already buried in the cold earth. Tiberius, the heir no one chose. Rome belonged to Augustus, but the one who inherited it was someone none of them ever dreamed of calling emperor. Tiberius was not Marcellus, not Gaius, not Lucius, not the hope of Rome, not the light of the Julian line. He was simply the one who didn't die young, and so, by the cold rule of fate, he was handed the entire empire, a childhood with no right to choose. Tiberius was born in 42 BC, the son of Livia and her previous husband. At age 3, his mother married Augustus, the most powerful man in Rome. From then on, Tiberius lived in the shadow of a great stepfather who never truly called him son. He was educated to be a noble, but never loved like an heir, because Augustus always believed someone better would come along. A brilliant general and a lonely soul, Tiberius was a skilled commander. He conquered along the Danube, repelled barbarian forces, won battles in Armenia, Germania, Illyricum. No one in Rome had a military record like his, but no one cheered his name like they did Marcellus. No one printed his face on coins like Gaius or Lucius. He was a hero, forgotten by his own father. In 6 BC, exhausted from being sidelined, Tiberius voluntarily exiled himself to the island of Rhodes. He lived there as an ordinary citizen, watching Rome from afar, like someone who was never allowed inside. When fate runs out of options, then Gaius died, Lucius died, Drusus died, and Augustus looked around. Only Tiberius remained, the one forgotten, rejected, but still alive. In 4 AD, Augustus adopted Tiberius, a decision no one celebrated. Not Augustus, not Tiberius, not Rome. I did not give the throne to the one I loved, but to the only one still breathing. Perhaps Augustus never said this, but history said it for him. Tiberius becomes emperor. No fireworks, no tears. In 14 AD, Augustus died. Tiberius took the throne. No one dared oppose, but no one was joyful either. Rome, used to the dazzling light of Augustus, now entered the grey shadow of Tiberius, an emperor inward, suspicious, isolated, and harsh on himself. The heir, or the man, pushed onto the throne. Tiberius never dreamed of being emperor. He was the heir no one chose, not even himself. He ruled Rome with cold iron, emotionless. No grand monuments, no romantic poetry, only order, suppression, and silence. They say he lived out his later years in Capri, on an isolated island, and died alone. An empire that didn't choose him, but had to live with him. Tiberius was not the shining legacy of Augustus. He was the shadow Augustus left when the sun was gone. Rome did not rejoice when he rose, but Rome could not stand without someone to hold the empire from crumbling. And sometimes, in history, the survivor is the one who bears everything. Even if no one invited them into the game. A poem at the wrong time, and the silence that was forced. An empire may forgive rebellion, but it never forgives. the truth spoken at the wrong time. In the world Augustus built, you could die from battle. You could die from political plots. But the most terrifying way to die was from a poem. Not because it was wrong, but because it was too right, at a moment when Augustus no longer wanted to hear the truth. Ovid, poet of love, and of a mistake that couldn't be named Publius Ovidius Naso, known as Ovid, was a famous poet in Rome at the end of the 1st century BC. He wrote about love, desire, transformation, themes that made Augustus furrow his brow every time he read. The book, Ars Amatoria, The Art of Love, was a nightmare for an emperor trying to rebuild morality. When Augustus passed a law banning adultery, Ovid taught women how to cheat discreetly on their husbands. Rome laughed. The youth were obsessed, and Augustus clenched his forehead. Moral reforms and the anxiety behind the god statue. By the end of his life, Augustus was no longer a warrior. He was the guardian of morality. He enacted laws, punish adultery, encourage marriage and childbirth, honor traditional family structures, because he knew an empire couldn't survive by the sword, but had to survive by the story its people believed in. And then Ovid arrived with love poems, metaphors of desire, and whispered lines that said, "Live true to your desires. Don't let Rome teach you the wrong way to love." Augustus didn't need resistance. He needed silence, a mistake and a poem never explained. In 8 AD, without trial, without sentence, Augustus exiled Ovid to Tomis, a remote place on the Black Sea coast. Ovid left only 2 vague reasons in a letter: Carmen et error, a poem, and a mistake. No one knows what the mistake was. Some say he was involved in the scandal of Julia, Augustus's daughter, who was also exiled that year. Others believe he knew something he wasn't supposed to know. Ovid was never allowed to return to Rome. He died in that cold land, his poems still trembling in his hands. Augustus, the maker of peace, who couldn't bear tiny cracks, Augustus could forgive defeated warriors. He could turn a blind eye to sneaky officials, but he would not forgive anyone who laughed at the moral walls he built. Not because he was cruel, but because he was afraid. He understood that Rome was a story. And if that story was mocked through poetry, no god statue could save the empire from decay, a forced silence, and a poem that never fades. Ovid died in Tomis, but his poems lived on. People secretly copied them, passed them hand to hand, read them by flickering lamps. Augustus also died, and he took with him a question he never wanted to answer. Was I so afraid of the truth that I had to bury it with the man who wrote it? A poem, a mistake, an empire. They should never collide, but history is always made of collisions no one stops in time. The death of a man without a crown. Augustus never wore a crown, but the whole world bowed when he closed his eyes. He was not a king, never was. No one called him Rex, because he himself had taught Rome to fear that word like a plague. But in the year 14 AD, when Augustus breathed his last, all of Rome, even those who once called him a usurper, fell silent and quietly wore black. The final night, and words that outlived the man. On August 19th, in the city of Nola, Augustus, now 75, lay in bed in the dim light of the evening glow. He had seen it all: civil war, betrayal, glory, loss. And at the final moment, he called a few loved ones near and spoke as if he were the lead in a Roman play. If I have played my part well, then applaud me as I exit. No crown, no throne, just a man who had performed his whole life to keep Rome from falling apart. The funeral of a man, and his transformation into a god Augustus was brought back to Rome. No one called him a corpse. They called him Divus Augustus, the divine Augustus. His body was cremated in the field of Mars, a place for heroes. His ashes were placed in a personal mausoleum, a structure he had built in advance, as if he always knew he was a legend waiting to be buried. The Senate, who had criticized him for a lifetime, now passed a resolution. Augustus is a god. He is the father of the nation. He is the bringer of peace. No one dared to disagree, because everyone knew a Rome without Augustus was a Rome trembling in blood-soaked memory. The man who never claimed to be king, but ruled like no other. He never declared himself emperor, but he held all the powers of one. He was only princeps, first citizen. But he controlled the army, he controlled the treasury, he controlled mythology, history, art, morality, and fear. Augustus didn't need a throne. He sat in the empty space that all others feared. And in time, Rome couldn't imagine anyone else sitting there. The will and a final message meant for no one. Augustus left a will. In it, he listed his victories, the money left for the soldiers, the buildings he had constructed, and a plea not to be forgotten. No affection, no private goodbyes, just a record written by the last survivor of the Republic era. He once said, "I found Rome in bricks, and I leave it in marble." Perhaps that's how he wished to be remembered, not with tears, but with a layer of white dust covering everything. A death that wasn't quiet, but no one dared cry loudly. Rome became more orderly, more peaceful, and more silent after Augustus died. No one knew what would happen with Tiberius. No one knew if the empire could hold without the man who built it. Everyone only knew one thing. The man who held Rome together with words, with fear, with an entire century of history, was gone and had never worn a crown. Culture and propaganda, when poetry becomes a tool of rule. No need for legions, no need for bands. Augustus ruled the minds of Romans with poetry, marble, and meticulously calculated romance. If you think Augustus was just a sword-wielding emperor, you're wrong. He was the chief editor of national culture, the manager of all media content in the Roman Empire, the man who shaped the souls of the masses with verses, statues, and coins, because he knew true victory is when the people think like you do. Rome, a grand branding project. When Augustus rose to power, Rome was a chaotic heap of doubt, civil war still fresh, people starved for information, for stability, every statue of Caesar a throbbing memory. And Augustus understood that if he couldn't make Rome kneel with force, he had to make Rome fall in love with him through art. He rebuilt the city in white marble, created grand structures not just to live in, but to inspire. Every road, every square, every arch was a political message. Poets weren't just poets. Augustus sponsored Virgil, Horace, Propertius, Livy, not because he loved poetry, but because he needed voices to rebuild the past. Virgil wrote the Aeneid, telling of Rome's mythic ancestor, like a prophecy about Augustus. Horace wrote of morality, simplicity, loyalty, the exact values Augustus preached. Livy wrote history from a perspective that, you guessed it, fully aligned with the state. From history books to poetry, from theatre to stone inscriptions, Rome sang along to the tune Augustus conducted. No social media, no television. But Augustus created a meta-narrative, a grand story no one dared to challenge. Coins, Rome's daily newspaper Augustus was the first to realize, money doesn't just buy bread, it prints belief. On every coin, Romans saw the face of Augustus, symbols of peace, victory, Apollo, a declaration that I am the protector of the people. Every time they bought fish, they subconsciously affirmed Augustus's rule. Every paycheck was propaganda in metal form. No slogan shouted, just hold a coin, and you had liked the empire without even knowing it. When morality became a writing topic to accompany his social reforms, Augustus redefined cultural morality and made poets name the right emotions. No more poems glorifying wild drinking, at least not on paper. No more praising rebellious girls, at least not publicly. Poetry became civic lessons. If a poem taught you love, it had to be the right person, right time, right way. If you wrote about war, praise the peace Augustus had granted. Don't follow the tune. Silence, or disappear. Not everyone rejoiced. Ovid was an example. Exiled for writing the wrong poem at the wrong time. Augustus's Rome was a symphony with a strict conductor. Any poet offbeat would have their strings replaced. No torture needed, no executions. Just stop your works from being published and you vanished from history. Legacy, an empire living on edited memory. Augustus didn't leave a philosophy like Socrates, no tragic play like Caesar, but he left something stronger, a vivid screenplay of himself, reprinted thousands of times through poetry, statues, coins, and stories. And Rome, a city once in ruins, began to love itself again through the lens Augustus offered. I found Rome in rough bricks and left it as a shining image in every person's mind.